Hey, how are you guys doing? Hey, have you guys been a part of any of the discussions around boundaries lately? Uh, I've noticed that theme is coming up, right? Whether it's personal boundaries, whether it's boundaries in marriage, boundaries at work is where I hear them a lot. So I'm wondering what your experience has been with like that. It just seems like everywhere I go, I'm hearing boundary stuff. I think some of the things I've heard recently, right, like need better boundaries at work because we have demanding bosses. And some of the little things you'll see play out is people going, oh, one last thing real quick before you head out on vacation, and go, no, I got to put a boundary there because I'm headed to vacation. Maybe sometimes it's pushing back against yourself, right? If you're one of those entrepreneurial type people, and you're like, man, the workload is just a monster. It's just gluttonous. It just comes after me more and more and more, and so you go, I need better personal boundaries. Maybe for you, you're in a relationship, and maybe it's a romantic one, or it's with a child, or somebody else in your life, right? And you just know, like they just keep overcoming your boundaries over and over again, and it's costing you relationally. It's fatiguing you. You're just not enjoying that relationship, and so you know you need to have some boundaries. One of the ones that I've heard recently is this idea of boundaries so that you can maintain your independence and your interdependence, right? So it's like this idea of, hey, I need boundaries so I can know what my identity is, but also so I can connect to other people. Not so you become codependent, but also not so you become isolated. And maybe one other one with boundaries is this idea of work rhythm and rest rhythm, right? Like when do I work and when do I recover and when do I reflect and play and adventure and where's my stability come from? And so boundaries, right? Like they deal with all those different things. And anytime I think of boundaries, I start thinking about building fences. So there was a time in my life where my older brother was professionally landscaping, and I was in between jobs and starting a new church, and so I got to build fences. And I know a little bit about fence building, and so I want to apply that to the idea of personal, relational, and work boundaries. So I just want to give you a couple real quick ideas for when building fences and also when setting up boundaries. The first one is this. Before you build a fence, you got to make sure you know the purpose for it. Is it for safety, right? Is it to keep the kids in and the wild animals out? Is it for provision, to protect your garden so that the deer don't come in and eat everything? Is it so that you know kind of what your area of responsibility and your area of autonomy is? Like I would tell you, before you put up a fence and before you build a boundary, you have to know why you're putting it up. What is its purpose? The second one is this. You got to check your boundary lines. You might mistake your property lines for somebody else's property lines and stake out your fence and then put it up and have somebody else come along and say, hey, you're in my territory. I would say this, just remember that putting your boundaries up on other people's land is called an invasion, and it usually ends in some kind of conflict, armed or otherwise. So check your boundary lines before you set up a new boundary or before you build your fence. How about this one as another one? Ask your neighbors for their input and give them an explanation. Fences that go up without any explanation, fences that go out without any consideration, often have a negative reaction. And the same thing is true of boundaries. When you just throw a new boundary up and nobody knows where it came from or why it's there, you can end up with friction. And so what I would tell you is with your neighbors, whether they're physical neighbors or relational ones, ask them. Ask them about this new boundary you're going to be putting up. Ask them for their perspective. And you don't have to take their perspective, but you ought to consider it. And then explain, hey, this is why I'm going to put this boundary up at this place in my life. This is why the fence is going. Here's a big one. Don't lock the gate one day, leave it open the next, let someone climb over it on Tuesday, and then freak out when they climb over it on Friday. Right? Like, here's the thing. Be consistent. One of the most confusing and damaging things you can do in a relationship is to be inconsistent, especially with your boundaries. It's to say, well, this is my boundary, and then let somebody violate it, and let somebody violate it, and then you kind of go after them when they violate it the third time, and they're confusing. What love does, love is consistent. Love sets a boundary and says, hey, I'm going to stick with it so you know what to expect from me. It doesn't mean you can't move your boundary eventually, but it means you do it intentionally. Here's just maybe one or two more for you real quick. You really don't have a right to put up your own fence and then climb over everybody else's. I see this from time to time, especially with those in leadership, is we get on a boundary kick. And man, I'm going to honor boundaries. And I'm going to set up boundaries for when you can communicate with me and when I'm going to rest and when I'm going to work. And then we violate the boundaries and the fences of the people that follow us, the people that we're supposed to serve. And so I would say this, if you want to show respect, if you want to show how much you value your boundaries, honor theirs. Don't climb over their fence while you have a fence up yourself. And one little pro tip for you before I go is simply this. When we get ready to start setting boundaries, most often we set them in the wrong place first. I know that could be a little discouraging, but I just want you to be aware of it. When we finally begin to set up these boundaries, go, okay, you know what, I'm going to take responsibility for what is mine, I'm going to map it out, and then I'm going to be more responsible for holding people to that. Oftentimes, we'll put the first pickets up right near the people we feel safest with because we think that they'll tolerate it. But oftentimes, what we're doing is removing freedom from the people who are the most trustworthy with our hearts and our souls and our time. So I just want you to know that as you get at this boundary thing, you may not get it right the first time. Matter of fact, you probably put it in the wrong place in the first time. Just be open about your communication. Explain why you're putting it there. Have a ton of grace when somebody says, I'm not really sure that that's the right time, right place for that thing. And then try again. And you'd be shocked when you finally get your boundaries up and that fence is finally built. What a beautiful, peaceful time you can have in your backyard. What an incredible garden that provides for your family. What a great sense of independence and autonomy to say, hey, this is my space. It's where I refresh. It's where I rest. It's where I build community. Like when you build the right fences, when you build the right boundaries, man, you could do some amazing things. So I'd love to hear from you, what your thoughts are on this subject. So hit me up and let me know what you think.